Everybody. Okay. Great. Jennifer, somebody said hello to you. Oh.
Oh, is it Robert?
I think it is Robert. Hello. Okay, so I am going to share. Okay. All right, so everybody should be seeing the new RPA, and it says, actually it says revised 622. So let's see if I let's see. Can everybody see it okay? I had to expand it for my own eyes because I can't really see
Yes,
it.
we can see it, Rich.
Okay, so, all right. So, oh, that's not going to do it. Okay. All right. So, this is the new RPA. As we all know that there are other documents that are attached to this. The agency, the new appraisal fair act addendum, wire fraud. I'm not going to go over them because let's concentrate on the RPA. So where's the cursor? Oh, there we go. Okay, it's called the California Residential Purchase Agreement and Joint Escrow Instructions. So an escrow officer is going to take this and they're going to from this and all counters, they're going to put together their escrow instructions. So the first important thing to do is to put the date prepared. It's really important because the date prepared is something that shows up on subsequent documents. So you always want to put that date in, and it's not necessarily going to be the date that the offer is accepted, because there could be several back and forth counters. So date prepared, the offer is from the buyer, and we'll get into representative capacity at the end. But I will say right here that an entity like a trust or a corporation cannot sign a document. Only a person can sign a document, or a person who's authorized. So if it's a trust, it should be saying Joe Schmo, comma, trustee or co-trustee. That's the way it should. Actually, I'm sorry, I take that back. An entity is the buyer, but the signer is the trustee or the authorized signer. So here you would put the entity's name as the buyer. So that would go there. But if it's just an individual, the individual's name goes there. Property is situated, the address. Always make sure that you have the parcel number there. And then we get into agency. As the very first document is the agency disclosure, and that's telling everybody the different types of agency. And it does say that you're going to come across a confirmation of agency. So who is the seller's brokerage? Who is the buyer's brokerage, and the seller's agent and the buyer's agent? Remember, it's by brokerage. The agency is brokerage, it's not the agent. So two different agents at the same brokerage, it is dual agency. So just because it's a different agent doesn't constitute that it is it is not dual agency. So that's really important. And the brokerage is defined as the corporation for the brokerage. Just because I have 3 or 4 offices, depending on what day it is with the DRE, All of these offices have different corporations and they have different DRE numbers. So from one office to another, it is not dual agency. So somebody from Larchmont makes an offer to an agent at Calabasas, that is not dual agency. So just just to say. So, and then here's a little box, just so you know, one or more brokerages represents the buyer or the seller. And if that is the case, that's where, say, an agent from Larchmont and an agent from Calabasas represent the seller. You would need an ABA, which is an additional brokerage addendum. Then we get into the potentially competing buyers and sellers. That's one of the forms that is before here, is that, and all that form is saying is that a brokerage works with multiple buyers and multiple sellers. We may have many different buyers who are interested in this particular property. And likewise, sellers, may have sellers that are selling properties very similar to this. So, it's important to disclose that. Okay, this is the big change from December, was they put all the terms at the top of the document. So this is the terms of purchase and allocation of costs. You will see this is item number 3, and you'll see A, B, C, all of this down in the first box. That is the item number. So purchase price is item number 3A. Then next, you're going to see this box with all these other little numbers and letters. That's the paragraph in the document that that applies to this item. That's what that second box says. So very first thing is the purchase price, and if it's all cash, you just check all cash. Next thing is close of escrow. How many days are in the escrow, or does it have to close on a specific date? I always give this example in this, that I had a client who worked in television production, and she would work for 6 or 8 weeks, and then have some time off and then work on something else. And we had to time the closing on a date when she was working. So when they verified her income, there was somebody to verify the income that she was actually working at that time. So that's very important. So the next thing is initial deposit amount. In Southern California, we like to see 3% of the purchase price. And why do we like to see 3% of the purchase price? It's because if the property is owner occupied, liquidated damages are 3% of the purchase price. Liquidated damages are those damages that if the buyer defaults or if somebody defaults, that's the most amount that can be recovered. So we like to have that in escrow sitting there. And up in Northern California, it is not that way. And other places in the state, it's $1,000, $5,000. It's different. And then either within 3 business days after acceptance, or there's other terms there. Now, this is the only days that are business days. So in the contract, everything else is calendar days. Increased deposit, money placed in the escrow after initial deposit, use the form DID at the time increased deposit is made. DID is a form that says this increased deposit is going towards the liquidated damages. So when would you do an increased deposit? It's not very common, but sometimes somebody will put in maybe 1% of the purchase price. And then after all contingencies are removed or after the inspection, they will put in the rest of the deposit. And but it usually doesn't really happen that often in these instances. Next is loan amounts. The first loan, how much is their loan? How much are they putting? How much are they borrowing? If they're putting 20% down, you know, then 80% of that is the first loan. And please, 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 please fill out this information. It defaults at fixed rate, not to exceed whatever the fixed rate is now. I used to say, it wasn't that long ago that I used to say, oh, 2.5%, 3%. That's not anymore. It's more towards 6 now. And the buyer to pay points, 0 points or up to, and that's a percentage. A point is 1%. 1 point is 1% of the loan amount. And why would somebody pay points? They can pay points in order to buy down a loan or buy down the rate of a loan. Also fill this in. Is it an FHA or VA loan? Is it seller financing or other? If it's seller financing, do not get into filling out that form. That should be filled out by really a real estate attorney. So if FHA or VA are checked, deliver a list of lender required repairs. The lender may require some repairs if it's a VA. So that date is how long the lender has in order to send those lists of repairs, like chipping paint repair, chipping paint, or other repairs to the property. So that's the loan. And like I said, please fill this in because it will save your buyer in a lot of times. Interest rates are crazy right now. So we don't know what's going to happen. So if you limit the maximum amount that your buyer is willing to pay as far as interest rates, if they exceed that before he or she locks that in, then there's an out. Don't leave it blank, please. Additional financed amount, that's if there was a second, that would go here. Once again, put in the interest rate. Occupancy type, is it a prime? It defaults at primary. If it's a secondary or an investment. Secondary would be a vacation home. Investment obviously is an investment property. And then balance, and it automatically calculates the balance that's due on the down payment. Seller credit, if any, to the buyer. Years ago, you used to be able to get a credit for your buyer, sometimes on VA loans or FHA loans. If the buyer doesn't have that much money, in order for this to work, they'll pay a higher price and then seller will credit back or something. That it still is done. It's rare, but it is still done. Additional finance terms. Would be in additional finance terms. It's actually gone out of my head right now. I usually have a good example, but I can't think of one right now. I'll think of it and I'll let you know. Verification of all cash. It should be attached to an offer. If a buyer can't show that they have all the cash sufficient in order to buy this property, it's very rare that a seller would go ahead and proceed. Also, verification of down payment and closing costs, the same. It defaults to attach to the offer, but you can always change that. And there are sellers who are willing to do that. Verification of loan application attached to the offer is the default. And also you should be checking what type of loan application you have. Is it a pre-qualification, pre-approval, or fully underwritten pre-approval? The pre-qualification is basically for new agents that the buyer has given their income and what their expenses are to a lender, and they've kind of worked it out. Oh yes, based on what you have told me, you can qualify for this loan. A seller doesn't want to see that. They want at least a pre-approval where the lender has gotten documentation, has verified what the buyer has told them, and they have verified that they can get this loan.
I didn't get to that point. You were constantly texting me, and I'm constantly looking for people.
Okay, to mute. Sorry. What would kind of sabotage, if you have a pre-approval, what would sabotage you not getting this loan? If you're working with a buyer, and this has happened to agents a lot, the buyer is pre-approved, everything's going smoothly, they did the inspection and all of that, and then buyer's so happy, it's their first house, and they're so excited, they've got a few weeks to go, and what do? They go out and buy a whole bunch of furniture on credit. That could railroad an approval, or they get a new car. Please tell your buyers, don't go out and buy big purchases, don't extend new credit, because the lender will do one last look at their credit before they close. And if they've done something like that, that could really hurt their chances of the loan being approved. So that's that. Verification of condition. Verification of condition is within 5 days prior to close of escrow. This is not a contingency. Within 5 days, the buyer's going to go in and they're going to make sure that the property is in the same condition as when they made the offer. And if any agreed upon repairs were asked for, then they were done. Like I said, it is not a contingency. You cannot stop a deal because the seller didn't do a repair that they said they were going to do. Now, if you haven't had loan docs signed, you can probably delay signing loan docs. You might get away with that for a couple of days, but ultimately, you would have to proceed. Once you get a demand to close, you'd have to proceed, close, and then take the seller to small claims court. Assignment request. An assignment is buyer. An assignment can be as simple as the contract is in a husband or wife's name, and they want to add another buyer, or a nephew, or an uncle, or whatever. That's still an assignment. So according to this contract, it used to be you could do it up until the end of close of escrow. This contract limits it to 17 days for the request. That doesn't mean that they still can't ask for it, but the seller doesn't have to entertain it after the 17 days.
And it can also be putting into a trust, like. from a
And then,
personal
yes, and they
bank
could
to a trust.
also, it could go into a trust, yeah, or an LLC or something, moving it from the individual to a trust. That's an assignment also. Or you're getting a whole new buyer in there, so that's also an assignment. Contingencies for loan, it defaults to 17 days. Or you can check this box and say there's no loan contingency. Appraisal, contingency for the appraisal is also 17 days, or there is no loan, bless you, no appraisal contingency. And this is something that you really need to pay attention to. Removal, especially in the market that we just had, removal of appraisal contingency does not eliminate appraisal cancellation rights in FVAC. FVAC refers to an FHA or VA loan. So on a FHA, or if it is an FHA or VA loan, you have to fill out this FVAC, which is an amendatory clause of the federal, I don't know what I can't think of it off the top of my head right now, but it basically what it says is that it needs to appraise for the purchase price. If it doesn't appraise for the purchase price, then the buyer has the option to put in more money. They still can put in more money if they want to, but if they don't want to, they cannot be forced to proceed with the purchase if it doesn't appraise, even if appraisal is removed as a contingency. So that's really important. Also, in this market, we saw a lot of this in this third box, appraisal contingency based upon appraisal value at minimum purchase price, or, and you have to put a number in there. So if the purchase price was $525,000 and the buyer was willing to put in an addition, if it didn't appraise, they would still proceed with the purchase if they were willing to put in $25,000. Then what you would do would put in $500,000. So I will read it based on that scenario. Purchase price, remember, is $525. Appraisal contingency based upon appraisal value at minimum of purchase price, or $500,000. So if it appraised for $500,000, which is $25,000 less, the buyer is still on the hook to proceed. Okay, so you subtract the amount they're willing to pay from the purchase price, and that's the number that goes in there. Believe me, when I first look at this for a while, I was doing it wrong. So
Can I ask a quick question?
yes,
About the FBAC,
yes.
the no appraisal contingency.
Mhm.
If they check that, I'm the seller and they check that, they can still cancel even if they don't fill out that additional form. So it's basically, it's pointless.
Right.
Okay, just want to clarify.
I mean, the lenders, if it's a if a VA or FHA loan, the lender is going to want that form, whether they fill it out at the time the offer was made, but the lender is going to insist on that.
So any seller accepting VA or FHA is already accepting it, they can't remove
They
that.
can't remove the appraisal.
Gotcha,
Right.
okay, I didn't know that,
And as a listing agent, you need to explain that to your seller.
okay.
Okay, investigation of property. Now, investigation of property is a lot of different things. There's an explanation at 8C and 12, which we'll go over, but they've consolidated investigation of property, and that defaults at 17 days. Informational access to property is also 17 days. So buyer has right to access the property for informational purposes only, and not a contingency, does not create cancellation rights. This used to be hidden in 14B, probably 3. Nobody paid attention to it, but now it's right here center, and everybody starts to pay attention to it. So even though you may have 10 days to do your investigations, the buyer still has an additional 7 days to go into the property and measure things, or bring their designer, or do all sorts of things. They have the right to access to the property for an additional 7 days. So that's important to note. But if they suddenly change their mind, I'm not going to say they found something out, because that would be a new material fact. But if they change their mind because of one of those visits, it doesn't create a contingency and they can't cancel. Review of seller's documents. The seller has 17 days after acceptance, or 5 days after receipt. The buyer has 17 days to review the documents. So preliminary title report, you have 17 days to look at the preliminary title report. Common interest disclosure, it defaults to 17 days. Review of leased or liened items, another in leased or liened, it gives example of solar panels, or a PACE loan, or Hero loan. Those are all leased or liened items. Water softeners sometimes are that too.
So Rich, the minimum you can put is 5. You can't go below that. Like, you can't put
No,
1 day.
you can't. No, 5 would be, the minimum. I want to note for all of these contingencies here, from L3 to L8, any contingency actually in between L1 and 7 may be removed or waived by checking the applicable box above, or attaching a contingency removal. So if you check the box of no loan or no appraisal, that removes it. You don't really have to attach a contingency removal. So just be aware of that. Sale of buyer's property, a COP. So if the buyer needs to sell their property in order to buy this one, you need to check that box, and it will bring another form up, which I'm thinking maybe I'll do COP and sellers finding replacement property as my next class. Okay, time of possession. Remember, it used to be 6 o'clock on date of on close of escrow, but possession now is when you get notice that it's recorded, the buyer has a right to possess the property, or you can change that. So seller occupied or vacant units, close of escrow. Okay, if the seller is going to occupy after the close of escrow, this is important. If it's between 1, which means not the close of escrow, doesn't count. If they stay 1 day, in addition, fill out an SIP. So from 1 to 29 days, it's an SIP. From 30 to and on, it's an RLAS, which is a residential lease after sale. Why is it a residential lease after sale? Because for some reason, 30 days triggers a lease, a tenancy rights. So make sure you're using the correct form. Tenant occupied units. If it is a tenant occupied, even if the tenant is going to to vacate. If it's a tenant occupied unit at the time the offer is made, fill out a TOPA. There is, it is handled in the TOPA about delivering that property vacant. Okay, seller defaults, it defaults that seller has 7 days to deliver their documents. That's disclosures, that's the reports, NHD, title, all of that. They have 7 days to deliver those documents. I was going to say something about this, but it went out of my head. So seller has 7 days to deliver those documents. They have 5 days, all parties have 5 days to sign and return escrow holder provisions and instructions. We all know everybody drags their feet on this. So you really need to push whatever side you're on to get these documents back, because escrow can't do their job if they don't have the information. So time to pay fees for ordering HOA. This is, the seller has 3 days to pay for HOA docs if it's an HOA. The next one is install smoke alarms, CO detectors, water heater bracing, everything that's retrofit in the city of Los Angeles. The seller has 7 days to do that. We all know that an appraiser is going to want to see that CO detector. And if you're a good agent, for those sellers who haven't done it, number one, a listing agent needs to get out of the habit of doing the retrofit at the end. It has to happen within these 7 days. It really does. If it doesn't happen in these 7 days, if you're a buyer's agent, then you keep a stash of CO detectors and you slap them in that thing before that appraiser shows up, because a lot of appraisers won't finish the appraisal until that's there. And some of them are nice and say, well, when you put it in, take a picture and send it to me. Others are not so nice, saying I have to come back, and that's an additional charge. So
But the seller could be liable for.
that the seller, according to this contract, yes, now is liable for. Evidence of representative authority. What is representative authority? That's that entity that is authorized to sign. Escrow is going to want to see that evidence that the person signing on behalf of either the seller or the buyer, or the entity of the seller or the buyer, has that right. So they have 3 days to do that.
Is there still an the representative capacity signature disclosure?
No, because it's handled in the document. We'll get to it at the end.
Quick question.
Sure.
If you have a short contingency period, can you reduce the time the seller has to give you documents?
Absolutely.
Okay, just want to make sure there wasn't a
Yeah.
minimum. Okay.
No.
Okay.
Items included. Please check everything that's included in this property. Is the video doorbell going to go? Security camera equipment. It defaults that the bathroom mirrors are going with it. I tell the story of, I had a buyer that I was representing, and the sellers wanted to take the bathroom mirror, and that ruined the deal. Because if they're taking the bathroom mirror, then what else are they going to take? They're going to take the potted plants that are on the patio. They're going to take this, and it snowballed. And I said, I'll buy you a bathroom mirror. And it didn't work. And so, it ruined that deal. So make sure that everything that's included is checked, and everything that's excluded is checked. And even if it is written in the MLS that the washer and dryer are included, or the chandelier is excluded, make sure it is in this contract, because the MLS is not a contract between the buyer and the seller. This is the contract between the buyer and the seller. So don't think just because it said it in the MLS, a lot of things, I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, the seller, you didn't show any interest in the washer and dryer, so the seller decided, oh yeah, I'm gonna keep it. And they have that right to do. If it's not in the contract, it's not agreed upon. So make sure that everything that everybody wants or doesn't want is in this contract. Natural hazard disclosure reports, including tax information. It's customary that it is paid for by the seller, but that doesn't have to be. It could be both. It could be 50-50. Make sure that you say who you want to use, and for an extra $20, always check environmental. It gives more information. There's blanks to add reports to this, like if you wanted the seller to pay for a foundation report or something like that, then add it here. Do not add termite, that the seller is going to pay for the termite report. Don't even add that the buyer is going to pay for a general inspection report. Why? Because everything that's on this contract is a part of the contract. So that means the lender is going to want to see it. So if you put that the buyer is going to pay for an inspection report, the lender is going to want to see that inspection report and you're going to see all the things that are wrong with the property. If you put the seller is going to pay for the termite report, then the lender is going to want to see the termite report, and the lender most likely is going to insist that that work be done before close of escrow, even though the buyer may just want to take some money and just do it themselves, or they're gonna, that particular window or whatever it is, they're gonna replace. Well, now the seller has to, or somebody has to pay for that repair because they need a clearance before close of escrow. To confirm, if you do not lower the dates on when the seller delivers documents and contingencies are removed, that gives the buyer an additional 5 days to have the right to cancel from when those documents are received. Correct? No. The only documents that gives the buyer the rights is the TDS. If you don't get the TDS, which is or the SBQ, which is required, well, the TDS is required by statute, then the buyer has 5 days right of rescission. But if the buyer has removed all contingency before getting the documents, that doesn't necessarily give them the right to cancel, because they did so with knowledge that they didn't have them. So it could be argued in a court or by a lawyer that you removed it without that documentation. With leasebacks, what is the best way to ensure that once seller moves out, the terms agreed in the contract stays in the property and vice versa? The terms are the items agreed upon. I'm assuming that the items. A deposit, when you have a leaseback, get a deposit. Because that's the buyers recourse if they take things that they weren't supposed to. Then they have a deposit. If they don't get a deposit, then it's to small claims court. So that's what that is. Okay, so okay.
Question, Rich.
Yep.
You have 5 days from the TDS and SPQ no matter when you receive it, even if it's after contingency.
Really, it's only the TDS.
Only the TDS.
Only the
Okay.
TDS.
So if
Only the TDS and what statutory documents that are required. Now that is lead-based, that is fire hardening if it is in a fire zone. What else?
Avid if marked on the TDS.
Avid if the listing agent's avid, if you may have the avid, you may have the TDS, but the listing agent doesn't do this their avid until the final walkthrough, which is 5 days prior, then that TDS isn't complete until the avid is attached.
So if you had a 5-day contingency, you didn't get those docs for 10 days, you still have, so you really have 15 days then, because you have 5 more than from when they gave it to you.
Kind of, sort of, yes. I mean, it's not a contingency. You gotta, the failure to deliver statutory required documents, you have a 5-day right of rescission.
Right. You can-
So it's kind of a contingency,
and
but
it
it's,
just-
yeah.
It
but
kind of
it's
adds
really-
on.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
We should probably send a notice to seller.
Well, absolutely. You should be sending that.
Right.
Yes.
But just,
So Rich, in that case, say they didn't deliver it till day 10, you would just ask for an extension.
Well, you should be, the seller should be asking for an extension prior to that 10 days. The buyer doesn't need to ask for an extension because the buyer doesn't want to give the seller more time. It's the seller who can't deliver the documents that would need to ask for more time if for some reason they can't get the documents. But yeah, no, the buyer wants the documents in the time specified in the contract.
Thank you so much for all the clarification.
All right, smoke alarms, CO detectors, water bracing. This is who's gonna pay for all this stuff, and this is determining costs. Government required point of sale inspections and reports in LA. We all know the 9A, and retrofitting. Those are reports and point of sale items that are required. And I will say this, I've said this time and time again, that they are required by ordinance of the city of Los Angeles. So those agents who say, oh, I've talked to escrow says we can just waive it, and we just sign that. No, I'm the broker. The only thing that I will waiving a 9A or a retrofit in the city of Los Angeles, retrofit required in the city of Los Angeles, if that property is unoccupied and the buyer is going to tear it down. Nobody's ever going to live there. Why? In the case of smoke detectors and all that, if the seller has a rent back, and stays there, and this wasn't done, and something happens, and there's a fire, and that seller is hurt or killed, or something happens, who are they going to go after? They're going to go after the brokerage for not abiding by the law, and the buyer. You're both going to be on the hook. In the case of a 9A, everybody thinks that this is an unnecessary document, but there are times when there is information on that document that's important. I had a representing a buyer, And on that, it said sewer connection, even sewer permit pulled, but it also didn't look like it was done. So we had no idea on this old house in the Hollywood Hills whether that was done or not. So and the seller said, the seller's agent said, "Oh, you just go have your buyer go down to the city. Yeah, it's done. You know, my seller knows it's been done. It's I said, happy birthday, and it'll be fine." I said, "No, your seller goes down to the city and makes sure that this has been done, and then send me the revised 9A." So they ended up doing that. So anyways, so once again,
Rich, I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
9A, we do not waive retrofitting in the city of Los Angeles. All right,
Rich, I have a
But
quick
only
question.
under those
The
conditions.
9A,
all right,
9A, oh. you can't hear
Yes.
me? Can you hear me, Rich?
yes.
The 9A report, what is exactly in it? And who's gonna pay for it?
Well, it has permits that were pulled. It has assessment information on there. It has a whole bunch of information. It costs the seller 70, last time I saw it was $76.20. And it usually takes 2 weeks to get. So if you're taking a listing, order that through escrow when you get the listing so that you have it by the time you get into escrow. Any special assessments would show up there also. Escrow fees, they finally put each pay their own fees. I like that better than both because it usually isn't 50-50. Owner's title insurance, customary that the seller pays that. But once again, it's all negotiable. Same with county transfer tax, city transfer tax. The HOA fee for preparing the disclosures, the HOA docs, seller, it defaults that the government required documents are paid by the seller, and then the buyer pays the cert fee for their lender. And then it's negotiable as to transfer fees. A lot of times, a good practice is both. The seller pays theirs, the buyer on a transfer fee, but the seller pays their transfer fee and the buyer pays their transfer fee. Private transfer fees, you never know if there's a private transfer fee until it shows up somehow. So I always would put that the seller, if applicable. Then there's places to put other fees there. Home warranty plan, who's going to pay for it and what's the total cost and who's it issued by. That's all you have to put. You don't have to break it down as to whether it's an advanced policy covering AC or whatever. Whatever that dollar amount will buy is what the buyer will get. Other terms, other terms is if you are a real estate agent, you're representing. If the seller or the buyer is a real estate, if the buyer is a real estate agent, then or has a license, may not be practicing, but there still is a license. You would put that here. If you're related to the one of the principals, you would put that here, because that all has to be disclosed per the code of ethics. Then other terms, there's millions of other terms that you could be putting there. Property type addenda. So there used to be separate contracts for probate. There used to be separate contracts for a manufactured home. All of these had their own contracts. Now, all you have to do is attach this addendum. If it's a probate or if it's a manufactured home.
Much better.
Yes. if this is a backup offer, this is where you would put it if it has septic. If the buyer's intent to exchange, if it's a 1031 exchange, use that form because that has protections for the buyer. Also, on the other side, if the seller is doing the same thing, use that. If it's a probate and you need court confirmation, these are all relatively new forms that you should be using. If this is the scenario that your deal is in. Buyer and seller advisories. The wildfire disaster advisory that talks about wildfire. So if the property is in a neighboring, if it's not in a high or very high, but it may be, in a neighboring neighborhood, it's not a high fire zone until a fire happens and makes it a fire zone. That happened a few years ago. Calabasas was on fire, for God's sake. So, and Agora, and now it's pretty prevalent. So if you're in a neighborhood around, use that advisory.
You're in California.
Yeah, exactly. If you're in California.
That's not a gray zone, or even if it is.
But what is that gonna accomplish if you give them the
Doesn't
advisory
hurt.
for the wife?
You may get pushback from
Like, let's say,
Yeah.
what's like Burbank, for instance. You want to give one Burbank.
sure. There is
Had a big
Burbank
fire
Hills.
there.
I lived in Burbank at the top of the hill, and behind me was a forest. So
Yeah, I would just give it out.
So a lot of agents attach the statewide. As a matter of fact, our legal team recommends it, but I don't make it mandatory because I know you get too many complaints from agents. It's like, so this is the end of the terms. Okay, so now we go into the explanations, what is the initial deposit? And going back, which I just noticed, it defaults to wire transfer. That is the most efficient way, even though wire transfers have their own issues, it's the most efficient way to get money into escrow. And I will say this here because I didn't cover the wire fraud addendum, but please go over with your buyer that you're not going to ever give them wiring instructions. You won't email them wiring instructions. That only escrow is going to give them wiring instructions, and when they get those instructions, then they should call escrow, speak to an individual, and confirm those instructions. Because time and time again, I can tell you, it has happened here that hundreds of thousands of dollars were wired to the wrong place. So it's really important to make sure that is communicated.
Can I ask a question
Sure.
about the deposit there?
Sure.
Rich, you were saying, of course, you want 3%, and liquidated damages can never be more than 3%. So if you have a 3% deposit, then additional deposit is pointless because you can.
Not necessarily, because
What?
because liquidated damages can be more than 3%.
Oh, it can be.
It can be more than 3% if it's not owner occupied.
Oh,
If
okay.
an investor puts, or for a second home, the buyer puts in more than 3%, all that money is liquidated damage.
Oh, okay.
So, yes.
So,
And this is very important
Buyer
paragraph, you can tell because it's bolded. If retention of deposit, paragraph 29. If initialed by all parties or otherwise incorporated, this agreement specifies a remedy for buyer's default. Buyer and seller are advised to consult with a qualified California real estate attorney before adding any other clause specifying a remedy, such as a release or forfeiture of deposit or making a deposit non-refundable for failure of buyer to complete the purchase. Any such clause shall be deemed invalid unless the clause independently satisfies the statutory liquidated damages requirements set forth in the civil code. Basically, what that's saying is that don't make deposits non-refundable. Just for the sake of making it non-refundable. Always make a deposit if the seller wants part of the deposit. It should always be in exchange for something. Saying, if I give you more time to get your loan approved, then you're going to give me X amount of dollars of this deposit, non-refundable.
Oh, interesting.
Just making it non-refundable, just because the buyer removes their contingencies, suddenly that deposit is non-refundable. There is an argument that it can be argued that the buyer can possibly get their deposit back, even though it went into somebody else's account. So be very careful about non-refundable clauses. All
Yes,
cash
I have a
offer, all
question.
cash offer,
Wait,
no
I have a
loan is
question.
needed. This agreement is not contingent on the buyer obtaining a loan. Oh gosh, no, I don't want you to expire. And then it goes into the loans. Once again, the FHA talks about the FVAC, balance of down payment. Okay, limits on credits to buyer. This is really important. Any credit to buyer, if there's a loan, any credit to buyer from any source for closing or other costs that's agreed to by parties shall be disclosed to the buyer's lender, if any, and made at close of escrow. If the total credit allowed by buyer's lender is less than the contractual credit, then the contractual credit from the seller shall be reduced to the lender allowable credit, and in the makeup of the difference between the contractual credit and the lender allowable credit. What that's saying is that if the lender only allows, say, $25,000 credit, and the seller agreed to $30,000 credit, then that buyer's only getting $25,000 credit. So, and guess who they're going to go after for the other 5,000? So it's really important to work with your buyer's lender as to, if we're talking about credits, making sure that that credit is allowed, or that amount is allowed. Okay. Verification of down payment, that's pretty explanatory. Okay. I get questions about this all the time. Buyer stated financing. Seller is relying on buyer's representation of the type of financing specified, including but not limited to, as applicable, all cash, amount of down payment, or contingent or non-contingent loan. Seller has agreed to a specific closing date, purchase price, and to sell the buyer in reliance on buyer's specified financing. Buyer shall pursue the financing specified in this agreement, even if buyer also elects to pursue an alternate form of financing. Seller has no obligation to cooperate with buyer's efforts to obtain any financing other than that specified in this agreement, but shall not interfere with closing at the purchase price on the close of escrow date, even if based upon alternate financing. Buyer's inability to obtain alternate financing does not excuse buyer from the obligation to purchase property and close escrow as specified. What, I get this all the time. They said it was all cash and now they want to get a loan. They're allowed to pursue getting a loan. What the seller doesn't have to do is cooperate with them getting the loan.
What does that mean?
What that means
Cancel the deal.
is, although it's not recommended, the seller technically doesn't have to let them in to do an appraisal.
Oh,
But here's another scenario. They said they were putting 20% down and getting 80% financing. They now want to pursue 90% financing with 10% down. So they can pursue that, but say they can't qualify for the 90%. They can't now say, I can't get the loan because the original loan was 80%. So they can't back out in that scenario because they still can qualify for an 80% loan. But just because they now cannot qualify for a 90% loan, then they can't back out of the deal.
So glad you brought that up. I have a question.
Yes,
So, I understand on the 80-90 thing,
Mhm.
obviously they can't back out on the loan. If they're coming in saying, I'm all cash, then there's no loan contingency.
right.
But if they then decide to put a loan on it, they obviously can't back out if anything happens with the loan. But the seller can't just say, never mind, I'm not gonna honor this contract.
No, as long as they can perform with the loan at the purchase price on that closing date, then the seller has to allow them to close.
The only potential problem really would be if they say, I'm not letting you in for the appraisal.
Correct,
Okay,
correct.
thank you so much.
Sure, sure. And in that, I'm glad she brought that up, is that if this buyer can perform on this alternate financing, the seller can't stop them. Now, if the buyer wants, oh, I need 5 more days, then the seller doesn't have to cooperate in that instance either. They don't have to give them extra time because now they suddenly want to do this loan, and it's going to take 5 more days. But if they can perform with the purchase price and the close dates with the alternate financing, the seller has to allow them to do that.
so as long as they close on time with the terms, the
Right.
seller can't tell them how to buy.
Correct, exactly.
Okay.
Okay,
Do you think an appraiser would fall under the informational access to property timeframe? Like if it was all cash, went to loan within those 17 days. The seller didn't want to allow for an.
I mean,
appraiser.
technically, I guess it could fall into that.
Informational.
It
You
is
can get an
kind of
appraisal with all
information,
cash.
yeah. I mean, yeah, but we have had sellers that, I'm not gonna let anybody in
Yeah.
to do an appraisal. Yeah. I guess because all they would do would be taking measurements, which possibly a designer or architect could be doing, taking pictures. Of designer or architect could do that also.
No.
So, yeah. Occupancy is self-explanatory. Condition of property at closing, and here it is, folks, 7B. So there is no need to put in the counter listing agents. Property is sold as is, because here it is, 7B. Property is delivered as is in its present physical condition as of the date of acceptance. The property, including pool, spa, all that stuff, is maintained at the same condition as the date of acceptance. That means for an investor, they can't let the pool go green. And once they get an accepted offer, they have to keep the upkeep. The grass needs to be mowed, all that stuff needs to be done. Okay, so this is also a very important paragraph because it talks about debris and personal property not included in the sale shall be removed by close of escrow or at the time the possession is delivered to buyer, if not on the same day. If items are not removed when possession is delivered to buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Buyer, after first delivering to seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days, may pay to have such items removed or disposed of and may bring legal action, small claims, as per this agreement to receive reasonable costs from seller. So it's right here in the contract that if the buyer, or excuse me, if the seller leaves items, personal property items at the close of escrow, they are deemed abandoned. That's huge because any other area, it takes 30 days that the party would have to store that stuff, not do anything with that stuff for it to be deemed abandoned. This is close of escrow. If they left it, it's abandoned. And if they don't pick it up in 3 days, then the buyer can get rid of it. And the buyer can get rid of it and go after the seller for it. What if this is a fix and flip, tenant occupied with stuff everywhere? Can we reiterate in the contract that we are leaving personal items as is, so we don't have any legal? No, I mean, you can't leave your garbage with the buyer to get rid of. I mean, if the buyer doesn't want your garbage, then you got to get, you as the seller, Mr. Fixer, need to get rid of it. You can't leave it for some, you can't make it somebody else's problem. Buyer is strongly advised to conduct investigations of the entire property in order to determine its present condition. Seller and agents may not be aware of any defects affecting the property or other factors that buyer considers important. Property improvements may not be built according to code in compliance with current laws and have had all required permits issued or finalized. Basically, it's like you need to investigate. And this is also very important. If you know a buyer wants to do something specific with that property, add a second addition or do whatever, you as the agent do not tell them, oh yeah, sure, you can do that. All you have to do is go down and get a permit. You can do that. Don't say that, because you don't know that you can do that. There may be some reason, some little local ordinance that restricts them doing what they want to do with the property. This has come up a lot with buyers who want to have Airbnb, and there's restrictions in certain areas of Airbnb and they can't do it. And after they bought it, then there's a lawsuit, and I'm being called to give a deposition because my agent said, oh sure, you can do that. Can't say that. This is why when everybody calls me and says this happened, I need advice on this, I need advice on that, and everybody hates the answer that I give them. Tell them to seek the advice of their own real estate attorney. we can't give that advice. We all want to be helpful, but there are limits to when we can be helpful. And they really need to do their own diligence. If they want to do something, go down to the city, call the city, not you, the agent, the buyer. The buyer needs to call the agent of the city. The buyer needs to do this investigation. So many times they say, okay, yeah, I'll call. No, don't call, because you may have gotten somebody down at the city who told you one thing, you told your seller buyer, and they think they're free and clear. And then when they actually go down to do this, they get the person who hasn't been there a week and told you the wrong thing. They get the person who's been there for 20 years and said, no, you can't do that. But my agent told me, well, if it's coming from you, then you're the one who's going to get blamed. That's why you don't want it coming from you. You want it coming from them so that they can go and sue the city and not sue you. Okay, so.
Something to consider with 5-day contingency.
Customer remaining in possession, that's once again, I know nobody likes to put in deposits, but that's your savior. Everybody said, oh, we'll do the final walkthrough after, when they're about to move out, after they've been in the property, after it's closed escrow, and after they're about to move out. No, it's part of the sale contract. So so it has to be before the close of escrow, because the only thing that is for is to make sure it's in the same condition when the offer was made, and that they made repairs that they said they were going to make. Maybe this is going to be the same answer, but let me clarify my question. I'm the listing agent on a home. The home has been sold with tenants in place. The home is a fixer, cannot obtain financing. Okay. So if the seller isn't able to remove the tenants or the junk. It sounds like the tenants are still there with their junk.
Okay,
And
I'm
that's a
sorry.
different story.
It was
If the tenants are there
this
with the
Thursday?
junk, then that is tenants with their junk.
Thursday
That's a
at 2
different
o'clock.
story. Then
And
the buyer has
That's
to,
what time? 4
buyer
o'clock?
is taking on evicting the tenants and getting rid
I'm
of
sorry,
them.
2 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And who do I see?
Yes, everybody mutes. I don't know where my all mute is, but wait, it's down here.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. No, it's not there. Okay.
Rich, I had a seller, not do the repairs. And then we still had to close and they had to sue him after.
Right.
Because it wasn't, the lawyer said it was $30,000 in repairs. He just decided, I'm not doing it. So, and it was on an $900,000 house. So the lawyer said it's not enough to not go to court, to stop the sale.
No,
Like if it was 300,000, you could stop the sale maybe, but not for that.
then if it's 300,000, you can't stop the sale.
Oh, okay.
No. I mean, it's sold as is, just because
Right.
they said, you know,
They're right.
Right.
So they had to pursue
Yeah.
after, yeah.
um.
That's why I always get cash. Don't ever let the seller fix anything.
Yes, don't let the seller fix things. Unless specified in, for the intent, contingent upon buyer obtaining a loan and contingent. Buyer shall, if there is no appraisal contingency or the contingency has been waived or removed, then failure for the property to appraise at the purchase price does not entitle buyer to exercise the cancellation right pursuant to the loan contingency. If buyer is otherwise qualified for the specified loan and buyer is able to satisfy lenders' non-appraisal contingencies for closing the loan. Basically, if you remove the appraisal contingency and it doesn't appraise, but you still can qualify for the loan, the buyer must proceed with the sale. They cannot cancel the sale if they can still qualify for the loan, that the only condition that they don't have is the appraisal, the appraising for purchase price. So they must go on. And when I say they must continue with the sale, they still have the option to cancel. Sure, they can get out of it, but what's the price for that getting out of it? They lose the deposit, right? So that's the cost of getting out of it. So if they're willing to lose their deposit just because it didn't appraise, then surely you can cancel. You can't force somebody to buy something, but there is consequences to not moving forward.
Except VA or FHA.
Except VA or FHA, correct. Because government. This was the, how does the buyer know going in that the house appraises? You don't. That's why you don't remove the appraisal contingency. That's why you use that little clause that says, okay, I'm willing to move forward if it doesn't appraise and I only have to come up with X amount of dollars. Because if it's more than X amount of dollars, guess what? I can get out of it. That's why all these people who just removed all contingencies, this crazy, market that we had this last, 6 to 8 months. I can't tell you how many calls I got. Well, they want to cancel. And they're okay, fine, let them cancel. They don't get the deposit back. And then there's a fight for that, and then they got to go to mediation, and then, and then if that they don't solve it in mediation, it's arbitration. So it's just a mess. This is the new form that we had, the Fair Appraisal Act. That's also bundled in this agreement. It's brand new. Basically, all it says is that appraisers can't discriminate against buyers, when they're appraising a property. This all stems from it's been about 2 years now. Investigative report from New York, and it's called Newsweek, I believe, did it, and it showed not only agents but appraisers discriminating against people of color. It depended on who a person of color wanted an appraisal on their house. They got a different appraisal than when that same house was appraised, and the person who was representing the owner was a different race. I mean, it's a fascinating piece, and I encourage everybody to go look at it. Condominium and planned development, this is all about condos and removal of contingency or cancellation. If any contingency is specified in paragraphs 3L or 8, buyer shall, within the applicable period specifies, remove the contingency or cancel this agreement. So they have X amount of days to, whatever the contingency is, to either remove it or cancel it, or cancel the agreement. Now, what we have here in California is called an active contract. Just because the number of days go by doesn't mean that the contingency is removed. Jennifer does business in Florida, and she told me that it is a passive agreement. That means after the 17 days, if you've removed it or not, it's gone. So you got to be on your toes and make sure you're counting the days, right? Yeah. So all contingencies can only be removed here in California in writing. So you've got to remove it in writing using the contingency removal. And so just because it goes by doesn't mean it's gone. So they still have it, and it could last for weeks and weeks and weeks if the listing agent is just not paying attention or doesn't really care or whatever. I've had contingencies linger for literally weeks. And it's like, well, I'm not gonna, you're gonna give me the more time. I'm not gonna do anything until you start complaining. And there wasn't even any complaint, about, hey, what's going on? Are you removing this? So anyways, we're talking about items included and excluded and liened items. Okay, inspection reports, legally required installations. Once again, that's the retrofit and point of sale requirements. Here is that when we talked about the appraiser having to come back in order to, because there wasn't a CO detector in the property, if any repair is not completed within the time specified and the lender requires an additional inspection to be made, seller shall be responsible for any corresponding re-inspection fee. If buyer incurs costs to comply with lender's requirements concerning those items, seller shall be responsible for those costs. So so that's why it's important to make sure that you have all of that done. If the buyer waives the purchase of a home warranty plan, maybe you as the buyer's agent is buying it for your buyer. That's more than fine. But in this contract, it's being waived because the seller isn't buying it. If you want to buy it for your buyer, then you can go ahead and do that through escrow. And usually home warranty companies, you have 30 days if you change your mind. If you don't buy it at the time of close of escrow, you usually have 30 days to get a home warranty. Okay, TDS, NHD. Oh, that's the other thing. The NHD, not the NHD report is statutory, but that piece of paper that everybody signs that says, that has the summary, that's required. And then the only way to get that is to get the report. So anyways, so that's statutory. The TDS, the NHD, and other statutory, like I said, the lead-based paint is statutory. If it's if the property is older than 78, most likely there is lead there.
Fire, you said the fire also.
Fire hardening if it's in a high or very high.
And FERPTA is too?
FERPTA is.
Okay.
FERPTA is. And for those of you who don't know, FERPTA is that the seller is how the seller, if they're foreign, from a foreign country, it has to do with taxes, or if it's, if they're not from a foreign country, if it's a married couple, you have, if it's a primary residence, is it an investment property? That's the form that needs to be filled out by escrow before close of escrow.
So buyers required to withhold.
Right. Yes, and that's really important, that if this is a foreign person who is selling the property, the buyer is required to hold 10% of the proceeds. The buyer is required to hold this money. And if they don't do it, this is all done through escrow. So, but if they don't do it, the buyer can be on the hook for the 10%. So
Not all escrow companies verify that they submit or verify the information.
Right.
Either.
that's why you need to use a good escrow company, like our new escrow company. Okay. This is this is bolded, so it is important. Okay, in the event the seller agent prior to the close of escrow becomes aware of adverse conditions materially affecting the property or any material inaccuracy in disclosures, information, or representations previously provided to buyer under this paragraph, such seller shall in writing promptly provide a subsequent or amended TDS, SPQ, or other document in writing covering those items. Any such document shall be deemed an amendment to the TDS or SPQ. However, a substantial or amended disclosure shall not be required for conditions and material inaccuracies of which the buyer is otherwise aware or which are discovered by the buyer or disclosed in reports or documents provided to or ordered and paid by the buyer. What does that mean? What that means is that if the seller suddenly remembers, oh yeah, I had a water leak in the roof and whatnot, and so the seller needs to amend the TDS or the SPQ as soon as possible. Just do an amendment, make it an amendment to the TDS or SPQ. Now, if the buyer did an inspection and in the inspection report, it's noted that there was an old leak of the roof, that doesn't need to be disclosed because it was disclosed to the buyer in the report. So if the buyer has a means or is given the means of this material fact on their own, then the seller doesn't have to disclose it. Another example of this is if you as the agent know of something, a material fact about the property that the seller hasn't disclosed, you should be disclosing it in your audit. And by that, you're satisfying disclosure to the buyer. So
One example, Rich,
yeah,
is your past inspection contingencies and a tree on the hillside falls over, doesn't hit the house, but you have to disclose it because it could be an issue with the hillside
sure,
stability.
yeah. So that's a good example. Now, if the seller never, and then we go back to the TDS not being complete, if the listing agent doesn't do their avid in a timely manner, it's not considered complete until that avid is attached, that listing agent avid is attached to that TDS. So agents who wait till the end, stop doing that. It should be when the TDS is delivered, your avid should be done. When you take the listing, walk around and do your avid. That's one thing. Now, the remedy for these new material facts, it triggers the 5 days of rescission. Now, perfect example of this is I had a listing agent who, up until the close of escrow, we're at the close of escrow and they're finally getting around to the verification of property. Number one, I don't recommend that. It's supposed to be within 5 days. Do it 5 days before. They're doing the final verification of property. It's closed escrow. They've gotten confirmation of closing. While they're there, Gladys Kravitz, the nosy neighbor from Bewitched, she comes up to the buyer, oh, you're the new buyer. Did they tell you that, this was a grow house and the cops have been here several times? Mr. Buyer said, no, I didn't know. Mr. Listing Agent, my agent, said, no, I had no idea. The seller never told him that. He had no knowledge of it. The buyer had no knowledge of it. The buyer said, that's it, I want out. I want to get out of this contract. He was out of that contract within a week. Whoever's sending me direct messages, just email me because I'm on a big screen. I can't look at this. So whatever you're trying to get to me, just send it to me to my email. So that's a lesson of, number one, it's a lesson to listing agents talk to the neighbors because the neighbors know everything. When I bought my first house, we went around to the neighborhood and asked, while we're in escrow, hey, what do you think of the neighborhood? Do you like the neighborhood? And number one, we met our neighbors. Number two, you learned a lot about the neighborhood. And it's a great way to meet your neighbors. Hey, I'm buying this property. And if they slam the door in your face, it's like, do I really want to be part of this neighborhood? Because checking out the neighborhood is part of your investigation. It's not only the property, it's about the neighborhood. So it's about your neighbors. An agent in this office was representing a seller because the neighbor was such a nightmare. They had to sell. The neighbor was putting spotlights onto their house at night. And it's like, number one, you need to disclose that. Everybody needs to know that. But, and I don't even know, I gotta ask her whether that thing ever sold. Anyways, let's move on because okay. Fire hardening and disclosure advisory. If it is in a high or very high fire zone, then that form needs to be filled out. Once again, nowhere in Southern California is it required at point of sale to get this report before close of escrow. It's the buyer needs to do it within a year. Now, if they negotiate and they want the seller to do it before close of escrow, then that's fine. That's part of negotiation. Or if the seller already has the report within the last 6 months, they need to present it. So that's the first thing. The other thing on the NHD, you have to look. It's not only, because I had an agent tell me this, sent me the report and everything. Oh, it's not on a high or very high fire zone. And you have to look on the report. It says you have to look at every line because in there it says in the county fire zones, it is in a high zone. So that means that property is in a high zone. And this agent was the buyer. And he said, oh, we don't need this form. Yes, you do. It is in a high zone. And all it is saying, the first part is fire hardening. And are you aware if the house has wood shingles or if it has, eaves that are vented, and if the seller isn't aware, just like on the TDS and the SVQ, if they're not aware, the answer is no. The second part is dealing with this report. So that's all that form is. But you have to make sure that whether the property is or is not in a high fire zone. And it's not only though, there's also a section that's called wild land. And that could be in a high fire zone. So you've got to, and if you're in doubt, talk to your NHD representative. Okay, so we've talked about the 5 days of rescission, withholding tax, that's about the FERPTA, Megan's Law, sex offenders, you know, there is a separate form if you want to use it. Otherwise, the website is there. If this is important to your buyers, they should go to the website and get totally freaked out by all the sex offenders that are living around us. Notice regarding the gas lines, this stems from a gas explosion of a neighborhood. Nobody knows the gas lines were underneath this neighborhood, and there was a leak. Talks about the natural hazard. Known material facts. Seller shall, within the time specified, disclose known material facts and defects affecting the property, including but not limited to known insurance claims within the past 5 years, or provide buyer with permission to contact the lender to get such information and make any and all other disclosures required by law. Lesson is, if you're a listing agent, tell your seller to disclose. I told you that they've lumped investigation all into one, because buyer's investigations include, but not limited to, inspections regarding the physical attributes. Then it talks about all of that. All other buyer investigations, such as insurance. Insurability is part of this investigation part. So they should be looking for insurance as soon as they go into escrow. If you removed your contingency and then find out later that you can't get insurance, or the only insurance you can get is the California Fair Plan, which is a crummy, expensive plan, then your buyer is stuck because they removed that contingency. That's part of their due diligence. So
A lot of properties can't get fire
and
insurance.
a lot of properties can't get fire insurance now.
Question.
Yes.
There's that, agents commonly refer to it as the inspection contingency. But there isn't specifically an inspection contingency because it's the investigation contingency. So I see a lot,
Right.
offers will be submitted, then you'll see a seller counter offer where the agent will say inspection contingency 5 days. Is the recommendation to then do a buyer counter offer to clarify? Because when you see as a buyer's agent, inspection contingency 5 days, maybe you're assuming I have 5 days to do a physical inspection, but all these other contingencies under the investigation contingency are still the default 17 days. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of
right. I mean, in that case, yes, I would clarify. Because when you're changing contingencies, you should be noting the item number. So item number 3B7 or what
Right.
it used to be 14B1.
right.
Was it? Yeah. And so you should be noting that and saying is now X number of days.
Okay.
You know,
So
so
the counter back with
Right.
the contract section number.
correct.
Okay.
So buyer indemnity and seller protection upon entry into the room, into the property, that's saying that buyer can do his inspections, but he can't damage the property. He can't put liens on the property. He can't do all of that. So title investing, you should not be counseling your buyers on how to take vesting. Okay, you should tell them to talk to their tax person. Time periods and removal of contingencies. We know about the seller's delivery. I'm gonna go down to continuation of contingency. If you need more time for a contingency, file an extension. You know, and once again, they may not give you an extension, but it doesn't hurt to ask. Okay, seller's right to cancel. When I have a listing and I'm going over offers with my buyer, I make sure that I say when I'm sitting down with them that you are, once you accept this offer, you are stuck with this person unless they don't perform. The buyer has all these contingencies to get out of this contract. The seller has one, and that's if the buyer doesn't perform. And then they have to give them a notice to perform. So make sure you're telling your seller that, because so many sellers say, a buyer pisses them off, I want to cancel. You can't cancel. That's not an option, unless the buyer doesn't perform. Now, if the buyer is taking a little extra time and they want, give them the notice to perform. Really, when I started in this business, the notice to perform was rarely ever used. It was the document that everybody was afraid to get. Now I see it. I see it being issued right and left. Back in the old days when I used to write contracts, you wanted to see an agent lose their mind, give them a notice to perform. Really, truly, I mean, they really would go crazy. In regards to insurance, does that apply to the loan contingency if the loan can? No, it doesn't. Insurance is part of investigations. It is not part of loan, because you can always get the California Fair Plan. You can always get the California Fair Plan. California, that's why it's so expensive and it's so crummy. What
if a seller just doesn't want to sell? They just don't finish the transaction.
You
They won't sign anything. They just have to go to court.
you give a demand to close, and then if they don't close, part of that demand to close, it says that the buyer can go to court and force the sale with specific performance, put a lien on a lease pendants on the property. So that, a sale can be forced by the court. So, all right. So, like I said, the seller only has that one option. Now the buyer, has all these contingencies, and if the seller really wants to get out, then they hold them to they hold the buyer to the contract. And you can give a notice to perform 2 days prior to the contingency is up. Don't wait until it's up. If it's up on Friday, give it to them on Wednesday, so that on Friday they have to remove it or it's canceled. Because you lose time waiting until the contingency is up. Then you go up against the weekend, and then all of that. So notice buyer or seller to perform. It used to be you could change that number of days. It is 2 days, and it is 2 days. It's not 48 hours. It's 2 days. So doesn't matter if you gave it to them at 5 o'clock on today's Tuesday. If you gave it to them 5 o'clock on Tuesday, Wednesday's day 1, Thursday's day 2. On Friday at midnight, the seller can cancel. So it goes by days. So it goes midnight to 11:59 p.m. So, and yes, weekends and holidays do count towards your days. the confusion is that when you give a notice to perform, it can't end on a weekend or a holiday. So if you give it on a Thursday, Friday's day one, Saturday's day two, you can't cancel on Sunday. So on Monday at midnight, seller can cancel. Now, if Monday's a holiday, that moves to Tuesday. So really important, weekends and holidays do count towards contingency days. But once you give a notice of form, it can't end on that day. Demand to close, either party can give a demand to close. The buyer can give the seller a demand to close in that scenario where seller just doesn't want to sell or doesn't want to close. And they can take them to court and force the sale. Now that's expensive, but you know, that's a buyer's remedy. And say the seller doesn't want to sell just to this buyer, then they can put the buyer can put a lease pendants on the property so that seller cannot sell to anybody else. That puts notice to everybody that there's a pending lawsuit on that property and title cannot be transferred. So that's important to note. You know, a party may be subject to a civil penalty up to $1,000 for refusal to sign cancellation instructions if no good faith dispute exists as to which party is entitled to the deposited funds. Note, neither agents nor escrow holder are qualified to provide any opinion on whether either party has acted in good faith or which party is entitled to deposited funds. Buyer and seller are advised to seek the advice of their attorney. I just had one where the buyer wanted out, but the buyer didn't want to send the cancellation, wanted the seller to send the cancellation. The seller didn't want to send the cancellation. She said the buyer was the one who was canceling. Why do I need to send it? And this went back and forth, and attorneys were brought in, and you know and the buyer really didn't have a leg to stand on to get the deposit back because he had removed all contingencies at that point. So the seller wanted the deposit. To which I spoke to the seller and I said, look, we need to get this ball rolling. We think you're entitled to the deposit. Cancel the transaction. The transaction will be canceled. He's not going to sign releasing the deposit to you, but that starts the mediation. So you can go to mediation, you can fight over the deposit. She understood it. She was, oh, yes. Yeah. Next thing I know, I'm not going to send the cancellation. It's like, oh my God, we had this conversation. Like, you know, and it just went on for weeks, and the buyer got an attorney. And then once they get an attorney, I send them to our attorney, and you know, and it's just for weeks until finally, because the seller was very disgruntled, and I said, look, I'll cancel the listing, but I can cancel the listing, but there's still this escrow. So I can't cancel the escrow until somebody cancels. So it's going to show up as it's pending. So you can go put it on the market with somebody else. I don't care. I'll release it, but there's going to be two listings now, one pending and now one active. And so I think she finally thought about it, and then she realized, okay, fine, I'll give him what he wants. I'll give him his deposit back. Then it still became a back and forth about who's going to send the cancellation. And, you know, it took about a month to get this whole thing canceled. And, you know, where it goes from here, I have no idea, but at least it's canceled. She's listed with somebody else, you know, good health, best of luck to you. So that's that. sorry, I'm trying to get through this, trying to make it 2 hours. Repairs, as Terry Lynn said, take the money, don't have the seller do the repairs, but some sellers insist on doing the repairs. So if the seller does the repairs, then you have, that's what the final verification is for, is to make sure that they did the repairs. Proration of property taxes, please, please, please explain to your buyers, if you're the buyer's agent, that you're being taxed presently. You're paying the tax on what the seller paid their taxes on. It takes a while for the city to catch up. Then they're going to tax you on what you paid for it. So you're going to get another bill. Don't ignore that other bill, because that, I had a client who did that, and it's like, oh, I didn't know. And it's like, well, we went over this. Just make sure that they are aware that they are going to get a supplemental tax bill once the city, this sale is shown in the city's records, and the assessor's office reassess that parcel, and they bill them for that new thing. So make sure they're aware of that. Joint escrow instructions, as I said earlier, escrow takes all of this and they put it together escrow instructions. This talks about assignment. We kind of went over that. This is what I call, this is what I call the glossary. It goes over, as is, what is as is, read this paragraph on counting days, please, please, please. It really does a great job on counting days and what is days and what is delivery, because this agreement, it changed what delivery is, and we'll go over that at the end. Okay, terms and conditions of the offer. Time is of the essence. Every contract, in order for it to be really a valid contract, must have this paragraph somewhere in it, that time is of the essence. You can't drag your feet on making decisions. You really need to move on these. Okay, so liquidated damages. If buyer fails to complete the purchase because the buyer's default, sellers shall retain as liquidated damages the deposit actually paid. The deposit actually paid. If the property is a dwelling with no more than 4 units, residential one of which the buyer intends to occupy, then the amount retained shall be no more than 3%. Any excess shall be returned to the buyer. So if the buyer put in more than 3% and they're intending to live in it, then the most that the seller can get is 3%. Release of funds will require mutual signed release instructions from both the buyer and seller, judicial decision or arbitration award. At the time of any increased deposit, buyer and seller shall sign a separate liquidated damages provision incorporating the increased deposit as liquidated damages. So if it's not owner occupied and the buyer puts in more than 3%, that's part of liquidated damages. So as I said, mediation is the first step. If there's a disagreement, they all have to mediate. You can do this. There's a form on CAR called demand for mediation. And CAR has a great mediation department that will assign mediators and all this stuff, and it costs money. It costs, I think it's like $400 or $500 that's split between the parties. That's step number 1. If you don't come to a decision, a mediation, then you go to arbitration.
Rich, quick question.
Sure.
Used to be you didn't have to initial those. Do you have to now?
You have to initial liquidated damages. You always have to initial liquidated damages and arbitration. Yes. we cannot advise clients whether to initial liquidated damages or arbitration.
Right.
They need to seek the advice of their own attorney.
So they can leave it blank?
They can.
That's right, but it has to be a meeting of the minds. The seller
Correct.
has to
If
do
the,
same
if the seller then makes it, if it's left blank by your buyer and the seller wants to mediate and wants liquidated damages, then the seller in their counter has to say the buyer is to initial, has to say liquidated damages and arbitration are a part of this, this agreement, and buyer is to initial both of those,
Okay.
both of those forms. So,
And the counter offer removes it if the seller doesn't sign it in the offer.
correct. Okay, so your question about representative capacity, here is the buyer's offer, and the default is 3 days. Here is the thing, entity buyer. So if this is an entity buyer where one or more of the buyers is a trust, corporation, or LLC, this agreement is being signed by the legally authorized signer in the representative capacity, not in an individual capacity. So the name of the authorized signer is John Doe or Jane Doe, treasurer or authorized signer or managing partner, whatever it is. And then here is where the name of the trust would go. So so print the name of the buyer. The name of the buyer is John Doe, blah, blah, blah. So here is the name of the trust here, and then the authorized signer, okay, and the title. Okay. So this is, now it is handled within the document. You don't need the representative capacity anymore. So, and the same with the seller. Okay. So the only other things I wanted to go over is make sure that the buyer's brokerage, make sure you fill this out. Fill out the name, your license number, the brokerage name, the broker's license number. And this is important. Designated electronic delivery address. So the email or the text or an alternate email that by sending it to that email, that document is deemed delivered.
Love it.
So, so if you email this to this listing agent, and then the listing agent emails you back based on that email, a counter, you've now established that this is how delivery is. You can't at a later date say, oh, no, I never got it. That's not what I meant, you know, like, because the documents you don't want to get, like a notice to perform, you're establishing this is the email address. And once it's sent to this email address, it is delivered. Okay. The last thing that I want to go over, presentation of offer. You don't have to sign or initial this. You don't have to do it. You can. It's a nice thing to do, but it's not required. What is required by, I'm looking for it here because they moved it, of course. Okay, it is Code of Ethics 1-7, Code of Ethics 1-7. And what that says is, if the buyer, the agent representing the buyer sends you a written request
Number
that
four.
where is it?
Right above the agents in the agent brokers box.
It is?
Number 4.
I didn't see it. Oh,
Whoop.
oh, Okay, stop.
Should we go? Last one of the presentation of offer.
Pursuant to the National Association of Realtors Standard of Practice 1-7, if the buyer or agent makes a written request, seller's agent shall confirm in writing that this offer has been presented. That's all you need to do. If they email you, was it presented? You email back, yes, it was presented. You're done. Don't let anybody say you have to send the rejection of offer, you have to send the presentation. No, you don't.
You just email.
You just email. If they send you a written request, you respond to them in writing that yes, it was, you're done. You've satisfied this code of ethics. For years, they've tried to make it mandatory for agents to have to get back it, by signing this, the presentation of offer or the rejection of offer. NAR and CAR won't do it. So this was their compromise, and this is all you have to do.
That's cool.
Okay, so that's the contract. I know that it's been a little over 2 hours. I was gonna say 4 hours. A little over 2 hours. Any quick questions anybody have? Sure.
I used to use the financing worksheet to help me fill out the math on the
Right.
RPA. Do we not use that financing worksheet? anymore?
Not really. I don't even know if they still have it.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll do a mock of this. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
It should automatically do it.
Right.
Including the percentage. It would be nice if if you say, okay, this is the purchase price, the buyer's putting 3% down. And it automatically calculates the 3%. It doesn't do that. You're welcome. What it does is if you put the amount, it'll calculate the percentage. I don't know why it doesn't do it the other way, but it doesn't. Anybody out in Zoom land have any questions?
Thank you.
Welcome. I don't hear any, so I'm gonna stop recording. No, that's my video. Where is the recording? No, remote. Where are you? Oh wait, I see a chat. Hold on.
Another review.
Enough.
One more time.
Yeah. Okay. And I will do this some other time when you stop sharing. Okay. Okay, there we are. I will do it another time, but probably not for a while.